The dust settled on Main Street as another wagon rolled past, its wheels crunching over the dried mud and scattered pebbles. 8-year-old Emma sat on the wooden steps of the general store, her bare feet dangling just above the ground. Her dress, once white, had faded to a dingy gray, and her dark hair hung in tangled knots around her thin face. She watched the townspeople move about their business, her brown eyes tracking each person with a mixture of hope and resignation. Mrs. Henderson walked by with her basket of fresh bread, the warm scent trailing behind her like a promise. Emma's stomach growled, but she didn't move. She had learned long ago that reaching out only brought sharp words and sharper looks. The baker's wife pulled her skirts closer as she passed, as if poverty might be contagious, as if the sight of a hungry child might somehow taint her perfectly pressed clothes. The town of Redemption Creek had forgotten Emma existed, or perhaps they had simply chosen to look away. Her mother had died 2 winters ago, taken by the fever that swept through the valley. Her father had followed 6 months later, crushed beneath a falling tree while working at the lumber mill. No one had stepped forward to claim her. No one had offered a home or even a warm meal. The townsfolk had collectively decided that Emma was someone else's problem, and since no one claimed her as their responsibility, she became invisible. She slept in the abandoned shed behind the church, curling up in the corner with old potato sacks for blankets. During the day, she wandered the streets, hoping for scraps from the restaurant or forgotten vegetables behind the market. Sometimes the school teacher, Miss Caroline, would slip her a biscuit when no one was looking, but even those small kindnesses came with whispered warnings to stay hidden, to not draw attention. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Emma watched a group of children her age playing with a hoop and stick near the town square. Their laughter rang out clear and bright, a sound that seemed to come from another world entirely. She remembered playing once, remembered what it felt like to run without purpose except for the joy of movement. Now, every step she took was calculated, every movement designed to keep her out of sight and out of mind. Sheriff Coleman walked past without a glance, tipping his hat to the ladies gathered outside the dress shop. Emma had tried talking to him once, after her father died, but he had simply patted her head and told her the town would sort things out. They never did. The Reverend had given a moving sermon about charity and Christian duty the following Sunday, but when the collection plate went around, the money went toward a new church bell, not toward the orphan child sleeping in their shed. Emma pulled her knees to her chest, making herself smaller. She had perfected this art of disappearing while still being present. If she stayed quiet enough, still enough, people could walk right past her without registering her existence. It was easier for them that way, easier to go about their lives without the uncomfortable reminder that one of their own had been left behind. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her attention to the north end of town. A tall man on a black horse rode in slowly, his weathered face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. James Holloway was known throughout the territory, a rancher who kept to himself on a spread 20 miles outside of town. He came to Redemption Creek once a month for supplies, never staying longer than necessary, never engaging in the gossip and small talk that fueled the town's social life. Emma watched as he dismounted outside the general store, his movements steady and deliberate. He tied his horse to the hitching post and climbed the steps, his boots heavy on the worn wood. For a moment, his eyes swept across the street, taking in the familiar scene. Then his gaze landed on Emma, and unlike everyone else who had looked at her that day, he stopped. He actually stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, as if she were a real person and not just part of the scenery. Their eyes met for just a second before Emma looked away, suddenly afraid of what that attention might mean. James Holloway stood on the steps of the general store, his hand still resting on the railing. The child hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but something in her eyes had struck him like a physical blow. He had seen that look before, in wild animals caught in traps, in soldiers who had lost everything on the battlefield. It was the look of someone who had learned that hope was dangerous, that survival meant expecting nothing from the world. He pushed open the door to the store, the bell jingling overhead. Walter Preston, the store owner, looked up from his ledger with a practiced smile. They conducted their business efficiently as always. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, ammunition. James added items to his order while his mind kept drifting back to the girl on the steps. He had seen her before on his monthly trips to town, always in the same spot, always alone. But today something had shifted inside him, some wall he had carefully maintained had developed a crack. "That child outside," James said, his voice cutting through Walter's cheerful patter about the weather. "How long has she been living on the streets?" Walter's expression shifted, discomfort flickering across his features. "Emma? Well, that's a complicated situation, Mr. Holloway. Been near 2 years now since her folks passed. Sad business, real sad. But you know how it is. Times are hard for everyone, Can't expect the town to shoulder every burden that comes along. James said nothing, just looked at the man until Walter started fidgeting with his pencil. The storekeeper cleared his throat and continued. Besides, she manages well enough. Children are resilient creatures. Someone leaves her scraps now and then. She's surviving. Surviving isn't living, James replied, his voice flat. He paid for his supplies and walked back outside. Emma was still there, watching the street with those ancient eyes. James loaded his supplies onto his horse, his movements slow and deliberate as his mind worked through a problem that shouldn't have been his to solve. He had come to Redemption Creek for flour and ammunition, not to involve himself in the town's failings. He had built his life around solitude, around the simple honesty of working land and raising cattle. He didn't need complications. He didn't need a child. But he also couldn't unsee what he had seen. He couldn't unknow what he now knew, that this town full of church-going, law-abiding citizens had collectively decided to let a child waste away rather than inconvenience themselves. The hypocrisy of it burned in his chest like bad whiskey. James secured the last of his supplies and walked over to where Emma sat today. She tensed, ready to bolt, her body language screaming caution. He lowered himself to sit on the step beside her, keeping a respectful distance. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The afternoon sun slanted across the dusty street, casting long shadows that stretched toward the mountains in the distance. I have a ranch about 20 miles north of here, James said finally, his voice quiet. It's just me out there. The work is hard, but the land is good. There's a creek that runs clear and cold, and in the summer, the wildflowers cover the meadows so thick you can't see the ground. I've got cattle, some chickens, a garden that produces more vegetables than one person can eat. Emma said nothing, but he noticed her hands had stopped their nervous fidgeting. She was listening. I could use some help around the place, he continued. Someone to feed the chickens, gather eggs, help with the garden. The work wouldn't be easy, but you'd have a bed to sleep in, 3 meals a day, and a roof that doesn't leak. You'd have to follow rules and do your share, but you'd be safe. You'd have a home. The silence stretched between them like a tightrope. James could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. He was offering to change both their lives with these words, and he wasn't entirely sure what had possessed him to do it. He had buried his own family 15 years ago, a wife and daughter taken by the same fever that seemed to sweep through these territories with cruel regularity. He had sworn he would never risk that kind of pain again. Emma finally turned to look at him, studying his face with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young. Why? She whispered, the first word he had heard her speak. Why would you want me? James considered the question carefully. Because someone should, he said simply. Because it's the right thing to do. And because I think you deserve better than what this town has given you. What if I'm more trouble than I'm worth? Her voice was small but steady, as if she were testing him, waiting for him to realize his mistake and take back the offer. Then we'll figure it out together, James replied. But I don't think you will be. I think you're a survivor, Emma. And survivors know how to work hard and keep going. That's all I'm asking for. He stood up and extended his hand toward her. So what do you say? Want to come see a ranch? Emma stared at the outstretched hand for what seemed like an eternity. Every instinct she had developed over the past 2 years screamed at her to be cautious, to expect nothing, to trust no one. Adults made promises they didn't keep. People looked away when you needed them most. The world was a place where you survived alone or not at all. But something in James Holloway's weathered face, in the steady calm of his gray eyes, made her want to take a chance. She placed her small, dirty hand in his larger, calloused one. The warmth of human contact after so long alone nearly brought tears to her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had learned not to cry. Crying changed nothing. James helped her to her feet, and for the first time in 2 years, Emma felt the solid certainty of someone holding on to her instead of letting go. We'll need to make one stop before we head out, James said. He led her down the street to the general store, ignoring the stares that followed them. Inside, Walter Preston's eyebrows shot up in surprise as James began selecting items. A new dress in Emma's size, sturdy boots, undergarments, a warm coat for the coming winter. A hairbrush, soap, a blanket. He added them to his bill without comment, and Walter rang them up without asking questions, though his expression spoke volumes. Emma changed in the back room of the store, emerging in a simple blue dress that actually fit, her feet encased in real boots that didn't pinch or rub. The coat felt heavy on her shoulders, substantial in a way that made her feel more real, more present in the world. When she caught sight of herself in the small mirror behind the counter, she barely recognized the girl staring back. They left Redemption Creek as the sun began its descent toward the western hills. Emma rode in front of James on his black horse, her new belongings wrapped in brown paper and tied to the saddle. As they passed the last buildings of the town, she looked back once at the place that had been both her home and her prison. No one stood in the street to wave goodbye. No one noticed or cared that she was leaving. The invisibility that had protected her for so long now felt like a final insult. The journey north took them through rolling grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. James rode in silence for the most part, but it was a comfortable silence, not weighted with expectation or judgment. Occasionally, he would point out landmarks or share small bits of information about the land they traveled through. The old cottonwood that marked the halfway point. The ridge where elk gathered in the early morning. The bend in the river where the fishing was best. Emma absorbed it all like someone learning a new language. This world of open spaces and quiet confidence was so different from the cramped poverty of the town, from the constant scramble for survival that had defined her existence. Here, there was room to breathe, room to think, room to imagine a future that extended beyond the next meal. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple, they crested a final rise. Below them, nestled in a green valley with a silver creek running through it, sat a ranch house built of solid timber. Outbuildings clustered nearby, a barn, a chicken coop, a smokehouse. Cattle dotted the pastures beyond, dark shapes against the golden grass. Everything about the place spoke of careful maintenance, of a man who took pride in his work and his land. "This is home," James said simply, and Emma felt something break open inside her chest, some frozen place beginning to thaw. He guided the horse down the slope, and with each step closer to that sturdy house, Emma felt the weight of the past 2 years begin to lift, just slightly, just enough to let her draw a full breath. They dismounted in front of the house, and James showed her inside. The interior was simple but well kept, with wooden floors that gleamed from regular sweeping, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall, and furniture built for function rather than show. Everything was clean and orderly, the home of a man who lived deliberately. "Your room is upstairs," James said, leading her up a narrow staircase. He pushed open a door to reveal a small bedroom with a real bed covered in quilts, a dresser, a window that looked out over the valley. Emma stood in the doorway, unable to make herself step inside. It seemed too much, too good to be real. James seemed to understand her hesitation. "It's yours," he said firmly. "For as long as you need it. No one is going to take it away. No one is going to tell you to leave. This is your home now, Emma. You're safe here." She finally stepped across the threshold, her new boots silent on the wooden floor. She touched the quilt on the bed, solid and real beneath her fingers. Through the window, she could see the last light fading from the sky, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening blue. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, the sound lonely but not frightening. "Thank you," Emma whispered, the words inadequate for the magnitude of what had just changed in her life. James nodded once and left her alone to settle in. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, and for the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. The rooster's crow pulled Emma from sleep, and for a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then memory flooded back, the soft bed beneath her, the clean smell of cotton and wood, the promise of safety. She sat up quickly, her heart pounding with a mixture of hope and lingering fear that this might all disappear like a dream. Downstairs, she found James already dressed and moving around the kitchen with efficient movements. He glanced up as she appeared in the doorway, her new dress slightly wrinkled from sleep, her hair still tangled despite the brush he had bought her. "Morning," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. "Breakfast in 10 minutes. Then we start work." The routine he established was firm but fair. They ate together at dawn, simple food but plenty of it, eggs and bacon, fresh bread, milk from the cow. Then came the morning chores, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, hauling water, tending the garden. James showed her everything once, patiently explaining each task, then expected her to remember and execute it properly. He didn't coddle her or make excuses for her youth. He treated her like someone capable of learning and contributing, and Emma found herself rising to meet those expectations. The work was harder than anything she had done before, but it was also purposeful. Each task completed meant something tangible. The chickens needed feeding, so she fed them and collected their eggs. The garden needed weeding, so she pulled weeds and watched vegetables grow from her efforts. The water needed hauling, so she hauled it, her arms growing stronger with each bucket. There was no confusion about what was expected, no uncertainty about her place or purpose. James spoke sparingly, but his words carried weight. He taught her to read animal behavior, to understand when a cow was sick or when a chicken was about to go broody. He showed her how to identify edible plants from poisonous ones, how to track weather patterns by watching the sky, how to sharpen tools and maintain equipment. He taught her to ride, patient through her falls and failures, until she could handle a horse with confidence. The weeks turned into months, and Emma's thin frame filled out with regular meals and hard work. The haunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced by something sharper and more alive. She smiled occasionally, small expressions that lit up her face and made her look like the child she was supposed to be. James never pushed for conversation or forced intimacy, but he was always present, always reliable, a steady constant in her newly reorganized world. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley, Emma finally broke the comfortable silence. "Why did you really bring me here?" she asked, the question that had been burning inside her since that first day. "You could have just given me money or found someone in town to take me. Why did you make it your problem?" James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "I had a daughter once," he said finally, his voice rough with old grief. "She would have been about your age now. Her mother and I built this ranch together, planned to raise a family here, to make something that would last. Then the fever came through, same as took your parents. I lost them both in the same week." Emma said nothing, sensing he needed to finish. "After they died, I thought about leaving, selling the ranch, starting over somewhere else. But I couldn't do it. This place was our dream, and abandoning it felt like abandoning them. So I stayed, and I worked, and I kept building what we had started. But it was hollow, you know? All this land, all this space, and no one to share it with, no one to pass it on to." He turned to look at her directly. "When I saw you sitting on those steps, invisible to everyone around you, I saw someone who needed what I had to give. And I realized I needed something too, something beyond just surviving day to day. I needed a purpose beyond maintaining a dead dream. You gave me that, Emma. You gave me a reason to build toward the future instead of just preserving the past." Tears streamed down Emma's face, the first she had allowed herself to cry in 2 years. "I thought I was just trouble," she whispered. "I thought no one could want me because I wasn't worth the effort." "You were never the problem," James said firmly. "Those people in town, they failed you. But that was their failing, not yours. You're smart and strong and capable. You just needed someone to give you a chance to prove it." Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I want to stay here forever," she said fiercely. "I want this to be my real home, not just a place I'm visiting until something better comes along." James nodded slowly. "Then we'll make it official. I'll ride into Redemption Creek tomorrow and talk to the judge about legal guardianship. You'll be Emma Holloway, if you want the name. This ranch will be yours someday, a real inheritance, a real future. You'll never have to worry about being invisible again." That night, Emma lay in her bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. The creak of wood cooling, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the valley. These sounds had become as familiar as her own heartbeat, a symphony of belonging that played her to sleep each night. She thought about the girl she had been just months ago, hollow-eyed and hopeless, convinced the world had nothing good to offer. That girl seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different lifetime. Spring came to the valley with a riot of wildflowers, just as James had promised that first day. Emma, now 9 years old and strong from a year of ranch work, stood in the meadow with her arms outstretched, spinning slowly among the blooms. The transformation was complete. The hollow-cheeked, frightened child had become a confident girl with sun-bronzed skin and capable hands. She wore her hair in a practical braid, her clothes were sturdy and well-maintained, and her eyes shone with purpose and belonging. The legal papers had been signed months ago. She was Emma Holloway now, officially and permanently. Judge Morrison had ridden out to the ranch himself to finalize the guardianship, and if he had opinions about James taking in a stray child, he kept them to himself. The old judge had simply looked at Emma, seen the obvious transformation, and made the arrangement legal with his signature and seal. Life on the ranch had settled into comfortable rhythms. Emma had proven herself invaluable, not just with chores but with suggestions for improvements. She had reorganized the chicken coop for better egg production, started a herb garden that provided seasonings and medicinal plants, and learned to keep the ranch accounts with neat, careful figures. James had taught her to read and write properly, using old newspapers and his small collection of books, and she had absorbed knowledge like dry earth absorbing rain. But today marked a special occasion. They were riding into Redemption Creek for supplies, Emma's first return to the town since James had brought her home. She had been nervous about it all morning, unsure how she would feel seeing the place that had discarded her so completely. But James had insisted it was time, that avoiding the town forever would give it power over her that it didn't deserve. They rode in just after noon, the sun high overhead. Emma sat tall on her own horse, a gentle mare that James had trained specifically for her. She wore new clothes, not fancy but well made and properly fitted, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. As they moved down Main Street, Emma noticed people stopping to stare, whispering to each other, clearly trying to place the girl riding alongside James Holloway. They tied their horses outside the general store, and Walter Preston's jaw literally dropped when Emma walked in. "Emma?" he stammered. "Emma Thompson? Good Lord, child, we thought you had disappeared. Some folks said you must have run off or, well, come to a bad end. No one knew where you had gone." "It's Emma Holloway now," James corrected firmly. "And she didn't disappear. She's been at my ranch for the past year. Working hard, learning, being part of a family. Right where she should have been all along." The rebuke in his tone was unmistakable. Walter had the grace to look ashamed, his eyes dropping to his ledger. "Well, that's wonderful news. Just wonderful. We're all glad to see her doing so well." As they conducted their business, other townspeople filtered in, drawn by the gossip that spread through Redemption Creek faster than wildfire. Mrs. Henderson appeared, her face a study in false concern. "Oh Emma, dear, we were all so worried about you. If only we had known where you were, we could have checked on you, made sure you were all right." Emma looked at the baker's wife steadily, remembering all the times this woman had pulled her skirts away, all the times she had walked past without a glance. "You knew exactly where I was," Emma said, her voice clear and calm. "I was right here, on these streets, every single day. You just chose not to see me." The silence that followed was profound. Mrs. Henderson's face flushed red, and she opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. Other townspeople looked away, unable to meet Emma's direct gaze. The truth hung in the air between them, undeniable and uncomfortable. Sheriff Coleman pushed his way through the small crowd, his expression a mixture of bluster and guilt. "Now see here, young lady, that's not entirely fair. We all assumed someone was taking care of you. We thought you were being looked after." "You assumed wrong," James said flatly. "And even if you had assumed right, a child shouldn't have to fend for herself because adults can't be bothered to do what's right. Every single one of you walked past her for nearly 2 years. You saw her and chose to do nothing. Own that truth instead of making excuses." The sheriff's face darkened, but he couldn't argue. The facts were too clear, too damning. The town of Redemption Creek had failed one of its own, and now that failure stood before them, transformed and thriving, a living reminder of their collective shame. Miss Caroline, the school teacher, stepped forward then, tears streaming down her face. "You're right," she said quietly. "We failed you, Emma. I failed you. I gave you scraps when I should have demanded the town do better. I'm so sorry." Emma felt her anger soften slightly. Miss Caroline had at least tried, in her small way. "Thank you for the biscuits," Emma said simply. They helped. They finished their business quickly after that, the townspeople parting silently to let them pass. As they rode out of Redemption Creek, Emma looked back one final time at the town that had taught her what the absence of kindness looked like. She felt no bitterness anymore, just a deep gratitude that she had found her way to something better. "Are you all right?" James asked as they crested the rise that would take them home. Emma nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "I'm better than all right. I'm home." She spurred her horse forward, racing toward the valley where wildflowers bloomed and a life built on care and purpose waited for her. Behind her, the town faded into the distance, a closed chapter in a story that was still being written. James watched her ride ahead, this child who had become his daughter in all the ways that mattered, and felt something close to peace settle over him. He had saved her, yes, but she had saved him too, pulling him back from the edge of a lonely existence and giving him reason to build toward the future instead of merely surviving. Together, they had created something neither could have managed alone, a family forged not by blood but by choice, by commitment, by the simple decision to show up for each other every single day. The ranch appeared below them, solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where dinner waited. Emma circled back, riding alongside James for the final approach home. Neither spoke, but the understanding between them needed no words. They had found each other when both needed finding, and they had built something real from the wreckage of loss and abandonment. As they dismounted and began the evening chores, the sun painted the valley in shades of gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new opportunities to grow and build. But tonight, They were simply home, together, exactly where they both belonged.